In 2014, 2015, Brazil was actually the first country to report large outbreaks associated with Senecavirus, and then subsequently numerous countries around the world, including the United States, Canada, and China have also reported outbreaks. And so it's not specific, it wasn't specific to Brazil per se, but that was when we started to see large numbers of animals infected at a time. One of the trends that we thought was unique or interesting was we would see a spike, so a rise in the number of cases in the late fall, or late summer, early fall. And we saw that in 2015 when the disease first showed up. In 2016 it did the same thing. And then 2017 and 2018 it didn't follow the same pattern. So that was one unique factor that we thought maybe we could look at. Other diseases such as PRRS will follow cyclical patterns, but Senecavirus doesn't seem to be following the same pattern. The virus is a picornavirus. It's a small, very small virus. You know, if you compare it to other PED or influenza, right, those are larger viruses. This is small. It's non-enveloped, so that means it doesn't have a lipid or a fat covering on the outside of the virus, and so it makes it difficult to deactivate the virus. Other viruses like flu have an envelope on the outside, and so that's easily broken up by detergents, and Senecavirus doesn't do that. You need to kill it with bleach or accelerated hydroxide products. So it's a very hardy virus from that perspective. And then, like we had mentioned, there are characteristic groupings of these viruses in the contemporary strains by country of origin. U.S. isolates tend to clump closer than, say, those with themselves rather than, say, those from Brazil. Okay. And there has been changes over time when you're looking back at historical viruses as well. They're not 100% similar. As a virus, in order to survive, they have to mutate. Kind of as a rule, as a host becomes aware of the pathogen and develops immunity, it has to change to accommodate for that. And so this virus has been changing for as long as it's been in existence. We have a lot of data over the last 3 years showing those changes, and then we can look back at smaller numbers of isolates going back to, like I said, 1988 was the first known isolate from a pig in the United States. So that's the oldest virus that we have. So we don't have a lot of history to work with, but when molecular epidemiologists look at the genetic code, they can try to piece together a proposed pathway or a timeline of when you might have seen viral changes. So Senecavirus, the concern that the industry has for the most part is the fact that it mimics transboundary diseases and it causes vesicles or blisters on pigs, adult pigs, neonatal pigs. But one of the interesting features, so again, other transboundary diseases would be like foot and mouth disease. Some of those diseases have components of impact to young pigs, young animals. So foot and mouth disease can cause heart disease in young growing animals. And so the question is, does Senecavirus do the same thing? There are clinical reports of increased neonatal loss or death, pre-weaning death in the first week of life on farms that have been infected with Senecavirus. And so what I had done for the presentation was to kind of aggregate materials that have been published as far as the clinical case reports. And so typically what we see in these affected piglets is lethargy, diarrhea. They might not want to eat, and then sometimes there's just sudden death. And when we look at the piglets for specific lesions or characteristic findings that would say that this is Senecavirus, many times they're lacking. Other times they might just mimic other endemic diseases. So one of the reported findings is mesocolonic edema, so that's fluid building up in the connective tissue between the loops of colon in the large intestine. And so that's not a characteristic finding to one particular disease. That might be an endemic clostridial infection, but we don't always necessarily find Clostridium either. So many of the findings are not specific, they're variable, and that's what makes it difficult. And so, you know, the consistent findings in these affected animals is they often have diarrhea. They're affected within the first week of life, and it can be sporadic within the farm. You might have one litter that's affected, and you have another one right next to it that's not. So the predictability isn't the best. We were trying to experimentally reproduce the piglet problem, the neonatal loss, and so we had infected pregnant sows right before they were supposed to farrow in the attempt to try to reproduce the disease to see if we could figure out what was causing it. We know that those piglets, the clinically affected piglets that are natural cases, they're strongly positive. They have a lot of virus in their intestine as well as multiple tissues throughout the body. And so we don't know if it's the virus that's doing that, or is it just a byproduct of other commensal agents that can get in and cause disease too. The best thing that for this disease and any disease, especially for a sow farm where you have a lot of risk or exposure and you have the potential for loss in those young piglets is biosecurity. We don't have a vaccine for Senecavirus, and so the preventative measures are trying to keep it out of your farm in the first place. And so the preventative measures that are in place for the other endemic diseases, PRRS, PED, those are all important factors. Being careful about animals that you bring in, being careful about the equipment, personnel, how you move through your facilities, those are all going to be important in preventing introduction into your herd. And then, if it does become introduced into the herd, there are some protocols that have been tried as far as exposing everybody so you get a uniform immunity in the herd to try to prevent spread or a slow crawling of the virus through the herd. Especially for like the piglet side of things, we haven't been able to reproduce it under experimental conditions, so we're left wondering, are there other farm level factors that are the real problem, not necessarily Senecavirus by itself, and we don't know that. As far as the understanding how the virus replicates, there's been some work done, even on the human side. Interestingly, this virus was first detected in a human cancer cell line, and so the virus was investigated or has been investigated as a immunotherapy for certain cancers. And so the human side of human medicine has done a lot of research on this particular virus and looked at how it replicates, what its receptor is. So there's a lot of kind of basic research that's been done on the human side that we could potentially tack on.